Hi. All right. So, for those who uh, know about me, I do have a podcast here, and I talk a lot about what my experiences are and all of what I've been able to do in my short-ish career so far. Now, with today's topic, I thought this would be kind of cool. I'm going to combine the two things that I do a lot of. I do a lot of first aid instructing, of course, and then I also teach a lot of fitness stuff, whether it's in group settings or one-on-one settings. And so the last 12 years of my career basically has just been teaching, instructing, teaching, and guiding others. And so I figured talking with Adam, for those who are listening to the podcast who aren't part of the CPR group, Adam's my boss at Conestoga College. I thought this would be a cool way to kind of do a meeting without doing a meeting. And it's just a lesson, ironically, a lesson about teaching, learning, and all of that fun stuff. So a little bit about me. Been a fitness instructor or a first aid instructor for 12 years come April. And right now it's February as this recording. And then 8 years as a personal trainer, both one-on-one and group settings. So whether it's in a group setting, one-on-one, hands-on, or lecture-based, there's a lot of different ways that I've had to teach. And so even this podcast has actually enhanced my ability to teach and communicate and the art of speaking and talking. And it's just practice, right? And so I'm going to talk more about kind of the art of teaching, art of instructing, guiding, and helping students. So there's some strategies and actionable steps that you can do to set up classrooms, whether it is in, I'm going to double it as whether it's fitness or in first aid aspect, keeping people engaged, and then just improvising and improving as an instructor as well. There's lots of different influences I've had, books, podcasts, other instructors, other trainers. And so teaching is a science, but there's also an art to it. And it just requires constant growth, adaptability, creativity, refinement, self-reflection. And it's a long journey for certain instructors who maybe of recent have co-taught with me or shadowed me. Some of the feedback I've gotten is that I make things look so easy or look so flawless. And I've gotten that a lot in the fitness side of things or in the first aid side of things. It's really just practice. There's no magic pill towards being good at something except just doing hundreds and thousands of repetitions doing it. And so I'm even going to talk a little bit about like how to not fall into the pitfalls and traps of doing the same thing over and over again and not getting bored. So let's just start with the basics and the foundation of great teaching. It starts with a lesson plan. I don't have a lesson plan. Why? I've been doing this for so long that I don't feel like I need a lesson plan. Unless I'm teaching something absolutely new that I don't have an idea with, then it makes sense to have a lesson plan. But I did have to have a lesson plan when I first taught. And same thing even with my fitness side of things. When I first were working with clients or in group setting, there has to be some kind of plan and some kind of structure. And that structure is going to be essential for beginners. It's essential for you as an instructor, especially a beginner, so that you stay on cue and that you don't feel like you're all over the place. And once you have that plan first and you've mastered the plan, then you can experiment with variety. And that's what has helped keep me from being super, super bored from teaching the same thing 12 years in a row, let alone it's the same thing for each weekend. Let's say I'm in 2 weekends a year on average. I don't know, I'm just using that numbers. That's 26 classes times 12. You do the math, plus random one-offs or recertification classes. And during COVID, it was teaching the same thing in the morning and in the evening as well. It, again, can be uber repetitive. So again, at first, yeah, you have to have a plan, but after that, you actually are going to be better off doing micro variations. And I'll talk about that when I get into the topic of controlled chaos. Other things too is to keep things really simple when you're teaching concepts, especially to beginners, and avoid what I consider the mid-wit trap. So sometimes things are taught in a simple manner because it's easy to remember and easy to be retained rather than overcomplicating it. So I'll give you a quick example in a first aid CPR standpoint. 30 to 2. You could ask most people who've never taken a first aid class before, what is the ratio of compressions to breaths? And they actually have a general idea that, oh, I think it's 30 to 2. Like, it's probably one of those things that's super simple and super memorable for people to understand. Well, why is it 30 to 2? Because it's more optimal than other ratios. But is it the most optimal? You can make an argument that every person might have a unique optimized compression to breath. Is it actually 29 to 2? But why do we say 30? Because it's probably just easier to remember and it's simple. And so rather than overcomplicating things, especially for students, and I sometimes see that with new instructors, new trainers, they try to overcomplicate things because they have maybe a fear of imposter syndrome, that the students are going to be worried that them as instructors, teachers, don't necessarily know what they're doing. Keeping things as simple as possible, it's going to be easier for, especially in our classes, they're not meant to be uber complicated. It's going to be really good for people to master the basics. And once you have mastered the basics and they have an understanding of the basics, then we can add a couple more layers to it, and you can always circle back to basic concepts. Another thing that I think is super important that I always start off with my teaching, and I set the tone early, and I do so by using what I consider our mirror neurons. So I'll talk probably more about mirror neurons later on, but long story short, people will mimic your energy. So as students come in to classes, they'll pick up your energy. Especially first thing in the morning, you might be tired, you might have had a bad sleep. You know, we teach a lot on Saturdays and Sundays, so I get invited to a lot of, you know, a birthday party or an outing Friday night, and it's like, okay, I can stay up until 10. I'm just tired, so I normally go to bed way before 10 o'clock, and even staying up to 10, I'm going to be tired the next day. But it's important to have, you know, positive energy and confidence, and to kind of show that you're fun in a manner, because people will pick up on that. That's that first impression. They do matter. And I try to establish some level of making sure people are punctual, that they're participating and engaged. So literally about 15 minutes into class, when I know most of the people have shown up, I start off usually by getting people registered with the class. Then I talk about punctuality, and I'll playfully try to call out anybody who was late, even by a minute. And I say, hey, you know what? This is a freebie. You didn't know where the classroom was, but now you know. And if you're late next time, then I'm going to make you do something in front of the class, which they don't usually appreciate. And I just say, hey, that's your way of telling me that you're volunteering to do some CPR in front of the class. Or I jokingly say, your name's going to get put up on the whiteboard. What does that mean? I don't know. Don't put your name up on the whiteboard. And instantly I get so many less people showing up late after breaks and stuff like that. It still happens. But usually then once they also see, oh, this person was late and now they're getting told that they need to perform, you know, CPR in front of the class. Ooh, I don't necessarily want to perform it in front of the class. Okay, I'm not going to be late. And I do make it a point of emphasis of participation and engaging. And I explain to them, if I know that you're learning, then the testing is going to be naturally easier because I understand that you're learning. And so I even start off with something simple like raise your hand if you would enjoy getting out a little bit early today. I keep it vague, but most people put up their hands. I'm like, cool, awesome. If you're late, that's not necessarily going to happen. If you're not participating, that's not necessarily going to happen. So I'm tough but firm, but I also do try to make it somewhat playful. Now, controlled chaos. I love chaos. Obviously, first aid is going to be a chaotic situation. In classroom settings, there's always going to be chaos as well, especially teaching at the college. I'm sure if you've taught long enough, you'll agree that there's a lot of different things that could go wrong, whether it's a student showing up late. That alone can cause chaos, especially like 20, 30 minutes late, an hour late. I think one time I had someone show up day 2. It's a 2-day course. They showed up day 2 saying, oh, I thought that I only needed to take one of the 2 days. I thought we had the option. And I was just dumbfounded. But you'd be surprised teaching for that long how much chaos happens. Hell, I've even had, I think I've had 2 people have a seizure in class. I've had someone faint in class. I've had really sad story. There was somebody in one of my classes in this past year that 15 minutes into day 2 got a phone call, and he's like, oh my God, I just found out my sister passed away. And obviously that's chaos. Like, that one's really sad. And again, if you're a new instructor, it's maybe not going to be that traumatic. In 12 years, that was probably the most dramatic one. And it's just, okay, now I need to deal with basically a first aid situation, and that's chaotic. Now, chaos in a classroom setting can actually be turned into a superpower. So for some instructors, especially when they're first starting out, like I said, you want to have a lesson plan, and that makes sense. But when chaos hits, your lesson plan might go out the window. And it's very important that you don't freak out and panic and are unsure what to do. So how do you prep for that? Is you challenge yourself months before this happens or years before this happens by trying to install small amounts of chaos into your own instructing. So there's an author I really enjoy, Ryan Holiday. He's more on Stoicism. He was explaining on a podcast a story of how he had this big presentation he was geared up for, and he had an assistant put his slides on a thumb drive. He 20 minutes before the presentation, they're uploading, and they're like, oh my God, there's nothing here. And he's like, oh, I have an hour presentation and I have no slides. And how am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to do? And instead of freaking out, it was, okay, cool. This is a good learning opportunity for me to embrace the chaos and try to do it in a different manner. When I teach a first aid class, I try to not teach the same exact way 2 times in a row, let alone multiple times in a row. Or, I'm always going to circle back to certain concepts and ideas or activities I enjoy, but even just changing the order slightly makes a difference. You might be teaching alone on a weekend and you have all of the equipment in the world. You also might be teaching where there's 4 other classes going on and other people need equipment. So obviously, if you're a newer instructor, you should probably stick to what's more organized, but you can always inject little bouts of chaos into how you teach, and that's going to give you a better opportunity to practice yourself chaos, and then that way you are more prepared when there is some level of chaos, if that makes sense. It's very important you constantly challenge yourself to adapt to different situations and to grow from these situations, especially if you're going to be teaching here for a while. Trust me, there will be chaos. This also can help keep students on their toes. It can also help keep you engaged. Teaching the same thing over and over and over can get repetitive, dull, and boring. And again, circling back to that mirror neurons, you're going to be bored. Your students will pick up those mirror neurons, and then they're going to become more bored as well. So it's important that you keep yourself on your toes, and that's going to keep them on their toes as well. Ironically, being able to adjust these micro chaotic bouts that are self-inflicted, that's going to build confidence in you and in your teaching abilities. But it's also going to build competence, that you can go things out of order, and confidence and competence are something that are interconnected. So this is even a concept I teach in first aid, especially when it's like a willingness to act. A lot of people have a lack of confidence. I know I would too if I ever had to do CPR. This is a fun fact. I've been teaching for 12 years because my other job is first aid, not first aid. My other job is personal trainer. I've never had to do CPR, even though I teach it. Although I'm sure some people who are listening, yeah, you've had to do it before. I'm sure it's chaotic in a scenario like that. I've had first aid situations many times in the gym where, someone drops a weight on a toe or rolls an ankle or broken finger. Seizures are pretty common. Fainting's pretty common. I've had to deal with that stuff. And because I've been teaching it for so long, I'm pretty competent in what I need to do. So I have a high level of confidence in these situations. Versus other people, the first time that they're going to get exposed to a chaotic event and they don't have that level of competence or confidence, it will show up. So again, that's very important. Again, this is going to prep you for real world application, unexpected challenges, equipment malfunctioning. The amount of times I definitely could count on more than just one hand that the computers aren't working. I'm like, oh, all right, I guess I'm teaching without PowerPoint today. Not a big deal, right? Disruptive students. All right, cool. I can deal with that. I've dealt with that before, right? And then you just adjust on the fly. And it takes me half a second to come up with an interesting activity that's different than what I've done before with my students, because I've done that many, 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 many times before. Again, sometimes I'm co-teaching with someone and they're like, oh, hey, can we do that activity you did last time? I really liked it. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about because I've done probably 100 different variations of that activity. But yeah, we can do something similar. And that's just how I keep things engaged and still enjoying what I do. And again, there's this confidence-competent loop that it's a great way to build into mastery. And so once you start becoming more competent with what you're teaching, you're going to be more confident. When you're more confident, you'll probably ironically be more competent. And so it can spiral up. And again, those students pick up on that. And again, it's very important that we keep the students engaged. So demonstrating your skills clearly, confidently. This also comes back to mirror neurons. So I'm obsessed with the idea of mirror neurons. You can think of them in so many different ways. Mirror neurons is basically people pick up energies. Empathy is a good example of that. Another one is just learning through observation. When you're demonstrating something to a student, their brain fires as if they're doing it without actually doing it, and that's a way of learning. It's learning through observation. Mirror neurons. How does this also apply into first aid? Well, if someone's having a hyperventilation, and I go up to them and I'm loud and anxious and not confident in what to do, that's not going to help them. Versus I show up, I'm calm, I'm confident, well, they're going to pick up on that energy and ironically also help calm them down. So those are little tiny things that I always think about and touch on when I'm teaching. And so the other aspect of this too is when you're getting people to demonstrate stuff in front of the class, make sure that the participation is actually observing and people aren't just on their phones willy-nilly. The other aspect of it too is, I like this a lot in the CPR side of things, is when one person's doing CPR, making sure the other person's watching and observing. What can actually be really beneficial from a learning standpoint is also peer-to-peer learning rather than master to student learning. Because sometimes the skill level is much closer from peer to peer, and that actually allows students to learn from one another. And then the student that's maybe getting it a little bit more has to teach to the student that's learning it a little bit less, but both of them get benefit. Whether you teach something, it's almost like you have to recall the memory, and then you're going to become more, again, confident, competent at what you're teaching. And that's part of learning. And then obviously the student, now you're learning from a peer who's at a similar skill level rather than the expertise who's been doing this for, again, 12 years. And it bridges that gap. So I think that that's a really important thing too. So I do think incorporating some level of peer-to-peer teaching. And again, it's as simple as a you go, I go format when it comes to CPR. Now, interactive activities are also great. Games. There's like a Jeopardy game I like to do, or a Family Feud, or a skill competition, and I just gamify things, and it helps them create some level of incentive, even though it's all for nothing. I always say it's something like, if you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, the points don't matter and it's made up, but I always joke, I just make up the rules as I go, and if you have a problem with the rules, well, arguing loses you points. And then there's always one student who kind of argues a little bit, and then I just, all right, -1 point, and then it gets rid of the argument. Little things like that. And they can tell I'm doing it in a silly, playful manner, and they tend to enjoy that too, right? I don't always have to be so serious. It makes things memorable. Even just using some level of incentive with a game, it can simulate a little bit like a real life scenario, just from the standpoint of, oh my God, there's pressure, there's competition, and people make more mistakes in those scenarios than when we're just doing it from a baseline of first time doing it. And so I think that's great. And especially scenarios in first aid classes that mimic sort of the stress that would be in a real life scenario really help get people going through it. And then I'll challenge them with critical thinking. So if they're just bandaging, let's say, a basic wound, that's one thing. And then in a scenario, I'll give them 2 to bandage. I'll say, okay, this is deadly bleeding and this is a minor cut, and I get them to go into their groups and I just observe. And most of the time, people actually go to what's easier, not what's most important. And they'll do the really easy wound first, not the deadly bleeding. And then at the end, I say, hey, you know what? You guys are all wrong because blah, 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 blah. We need to do the serious one first. Wouldn't you guys all agree? Sometimes in first aid, it's teaching that critical thinking skill as well. They're not going to have the textbook around. They have to think on their right away, and they have to improvise. So again, even how we're teaching, you start off basic, you add a bit more nuance, and then you challenge yourself in chaos. And that's how I usually try to get people to work through the class as well. And again, there's balancing group activity and individual feedback, right? Walking around the room and getting little tiny bits of feedback is great. And sometimes less feedback is better. You only want to maybe give 1 or 2 small pieces of information that they can build on rather than give a billion things. Or if it's way too much that you have to give, maybe you stop and you get the whole class to restart, because if they're making that many mistakes, maybe other people too, and maybe you didn't do a good enough job teaching it from the get-go. Because again, people will pick up what you are doing. So maybe you need to break down kind of what you're teaching step by step a little bit more, start a bit more from the basics, and then build your way back up, right? And then do your best to remember names. That's always something I'm not the best with. And it just makes things more personal. People love to hear their names. All right. Adapting to your audience. So everyone's going to have different skill levels when they come into your class. Maybe you get a class full of PSWs. Even then, they're going to have different skill levels. They're going to have different age, different education background. It also depends. I've had to teach high school students sometimes, and sometimes it's corporate professionals, and everyone's there different. So make sure that you kind of see what skill level they're at and try to meet them with where they're at, and then get them to go where you want them to go. And I'm always big on progress over perfection. I don't think that there's ever going to be somebody who's absolutely perfect at anything we do, and I'm going to worry less about that. That's falling into that midwit trap, and worrying more about just perfection. One thing I joke, and it's, you know what? Bad CPR is better than no CPR. And it's not that I want them to do bad CPR. It's just at least they're trying, and at least they're practicing, and no one's going to do great CPR on a dummy the first time they've ever had to touch a dummy. I'm sure some people have touched dummies before, but maybe it's been 3 years, right? And so, hey, you know what? That's not bad, but we can do better because we can just make these little micro adjustments now. And the other side of it too is developing multiple ways to teach sort of the same concept. That prevents you, again, from becoming too bored, but it also is great for some people who are a bit more hands-on learning and some people who are more visual learners or auditory learners. Most people probably do learn best by doing, but sometimes they need to be taught first and then they need to do it. And maybe you need to spend more time with the hands-on stuff. I don't think I've ever had a complaint because we did too many scenarios that are hands-on, but I'm sure that there's been complaints that there hasn't been enough of that. So just keep that in mind as well. And again, keep in mind that there's always going to be some level of language barriers, cultural norms, physical abilities. So you want to create safe, inclusive environments where people feel comfortable asking questions. And there's no such thing as a dumb question. Sometimes I've had some really interesting questions and I just look puzzled for a second, and I do try to make sure I answer it appropriately. All right, so there are going to be common blind spots, even with myself. If I had another expert instructor co-teaching with me, there's going to be stuff that they do. I'm like, oh yeah, that's stuff that I know I should do. And students are going to have their blind spots as well. When there's some stuff that might just seem too complicated to them, you can tell based off of their energy. Maybe you have to break it down into smaller, more digestible chunks, right? Focus on a couple key takeaways. One of my favorite activities at the end of the day as a review is to get them to write down 3 key takeaways. I'll put them in groups, and I only want to hear one of them, but I always get them to write down 3 in case I don't like one of the takeaways or someone else has said that takeaway. And that's just a good way for that recalling. And then falling into not being able to adapt in real time. So again, paying attention to people's body language, energy levels, engagement. Again, that has to do with mirror neurons. And be willing to pivot if students seem confused, bored, disengagement. Maybe you need to do a hands-on activity more often and sprinkle that in rather than all the lecturing and then all the hands-on stuff. And then again, keep in mind that students sometimes might feel nervous, frustrated, or overwhelmed. So be playful, be lighthearted, be a little jokester. Nothing too serious, nothing too crazy. But we're here for learning, but you can also make it fun and engaging. And yeah, it is a serious topic, but at the same time, people are going to do much better with that level of engaging. And I try, even when I get people to be late and I try to do something CPR-wise, If I can tell that they're already really nervous, I might make it an easier thing that they can do. Or maybe I'll say, hey, you can bring a partner up and do it with a partner. Or maybe I'll wait until the end of the day to pick on them. And I'm just like, okay, your name's on the board. At the end of the day or at the end of tomorrow, I'm going to get you to do something really small for us. And again, you doing this long enough, you can kind of pick that up. If you're still new to it, then maybe that's not something that you're quite ready for yet. Again, just constant self-reflection and growth. Always be a student yourself. As an instructor, I'm always trying to learn little things. Even things I've learned in fitness from other instructors apply to my first aid teaching style, right? And it's just different ways to improve my craft. I'm obsessed with audiobooks and podcasts. If you can't tell, that's why I started my own podcast. And ironically, making a podcast has made me better at talking. Being an instructor for 12 years has made me probably better at starting a podcast, because this is literally all I'm doing is just lecturing. I just happen to be in front of a camera now with a microphone on without an audience. So it's kind of weird, staring into a camera, but it definitely helps. Even one thing that I know I actually kind of want to do, but I haven't done it yet because I like to go to bed way too early, so I don't typically have a social life at night. That's the joy of being up at 5 a.m. as a trainer. I kind of want to take improv at some point. I think that would be uber beneficial. I call it skill stacking for my profession, whether it's in first aid, whether it's in fitness, or even something like content creating, podcasting, etc., is improv, and be able to go with the flow and roll with the punches. And so that's something that I think could help my craft. And again, self-reflection is always going to be part of that too. So after each class, what went well, what could have been done better. One of the best things I got was a lot of feedback when I first started here, and I don't know why the college doesn't do that anymore, but there were these forms that we would hand out and people would rate you. I didn't like it when it was just the boxes, because people would either do all yeses, and it's like, okay, I know I'm not that good. But when there was a comment section, then it was good. And it's I think it's called like the shit sandwich. Something that went well, something could have been better, and something that went well. The shit is in the middle. That's why it's called the shit sandwich. That's like a common feedback thing. But like even when I'm doing co-teaches with other students, I try to get my students to say, hey, we were co-teaching with John. He's not going to, it's anonymous. If you want to give some feedback, what's something that he did great, but what's also something that he could improve on, and just kind of wording it that way. And sometimes people say, oh, no, he didn't have anything to improve on, when I know I have 7 different things that he could improve on, even though they're really tiny things. That's okay. But that feedback is really important, especially if you're new to teaching. And then again, experiment, right? That's that controlled chaos, new activities, new teaching methods. Maybe it's some new cool, fun little thing that you learned, and that's a good way to incorporate it. I have learned a lot from exercise physiology that I can incorporate just micro fun facts around, the environmental illnesses or the diabetic side of things, just because I find it fun, enjoyable. And when I learn something new like that, and I don't try to overcomplicate it, I try to keep it simple. And I tell myself, okay, how can I do this in the simplest way possible? Again, dialing back into the mirror neurons, students are going to reflect the energy that you bring to them. So there are always going to be times where it's like, God, that was such a tough class. I try to reflect, okay, was I my best self today? Was I off a little bit? What could I have done differently at the start? And sometimes it is what it is. Maybe you did good. It's just that they were that disruptive of a group that it threw you off. And then again, you learn from that. Starting off positive and confident and playful is usually a good way to engage participants. Sometimes I actually like to throw people into the fire right away too, and that's keeping them on their toes, right? And it also can keep you on your toes. Acknowledge that you won't always be at your best. I have an A game for sure, but when I'm not on my A game, let's say I'm super tired again, there was a birthday party the night before, and I'm just tired. Maybe I have a B plus game, and maybe it takes me a little while to get into my A game, and that's completely normal. So have your reliable go-to strategies for when you're low, but then when you're on your A game and you want to play with different ideas, then that's a great time to do that, right? And then again, just keep reminding yourself, reflect about, okay, why do you enjoy teaching? What are you passionate about? And celebrate your growth as an instructor. So tracking students' learning, right? There's going to be assessments. little mini quizzes you can give them, demonstrations, group discussions, and that's a good way to gauge understanding. Again, that's why I like the scenarios and the fun little kind of Jeopardy games I come up with, right? Even just getting students to reflect on key points and explaining the key points in their own words at the end of the day is something I tend to do, which also is great as well. And then when someone does something well, obviously acknowledge that they've done it well, but also give them feedback on where they can improve. And then when they did improve in it, hey, you know what? That looks much better. I'm just going to close off here. Mastery, I love that concept and idea. It comes from years and years and years of practice, experimentation, self-reflection. And again, the term of skill stacking, certain things that you have in your other jobs, professions, other ways that you've kind of learned and grown. You are an individual and you're going to master yourself. And so I think that's one really unique thing about having multiple different instructors is everyone's going to have their own strengths and you've mastered those strengths, but they can still complement one another as well. But then again, do that self-reflection on your blind spots. And it's like, okay, can I fix these blind spots a little bit? And that's why I think sometimes when you're teaching with other instructors, that can be a great way for you to learn from them as well, right? Again, a couple key takeaways: the mirror neuron, setting tone, energy, confidence, embracing the chaos, and adapting. Obviously starting off simple and then build and grow from there. Engaging students through activities, participation, peer-to-peer teaching. And then again, we're just going to constantly try to get us to grow ourselves as instructors. So that is the podcast. I thought it'd be kind of cool to record it on here. I tried to keep it around 30-minute mark, which I did that, so it's pretty good. Yeah, if you have any questions, comments, technically you could comment in here. You can shoot me a message. You guys all probably have my email. Currently I'm in Argentina, Buenos Aires, digital nomad right now for the next 7 more weeks, 3 more weeks here, 4 weeks in Peru. And so what I do when I'm here is I try to focus a bit more on the online side of things. So this is, again, great practice for me to have different concepts and ideas that I'm teaching teaching you how to teach basically. But again, I always look at these little things as of leverage points. That's why I have a podcast. I'm going to post this to the public. Obviously, this is for you guys, but I'm sure this can, I try to keep it broad and not too CPR specific, just kind of teaching specific. This hopefully can transfer into anybody who's facilitating classrooms. And again, you guys can give me feedback too. Do you have any follow-up questions? What could I have talked about a bit more? Or any other key points I could have missed? So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'd love to hear any kind of feedback from you guys. Don't just say, oh, it was great. Like, again, that feedback of, okay, what was good, what could have been better, and what was good again. So, yeah, I'll talk to you guys when I talk to you guys.